So welcome back. We have Professor Lekha Chakraborty as the speaker of this session. She is a versatile economist. She is the pioneer of gender budgeting studies in economic analysis in India. She has she works on varied fields like linkages between macroeconomics and public finance, uh, fiscal federalism, extractive sector economics, financing human development, and of course, gender budgeting. She is a associate research associate with the Levy Economics Institute of Bard College, New York. And in the past, she has also worked with various multilateral organizations like IMF, World Bank, UNISCAP, UNDP, and UN Women and Commonwealth Secretariat. She has also experiences of working on macrofiscal policy for human development for 7 countries in the world. So she is going to give a talk on economics of government, and it will be. I hope it will be a very, very interactive session because she's a her lecture is always very, it's a very nice experience to listen to her. So I hope all of you will enjoy. And so Lekha ma'am, it's up to you.
Thank you, Rudrani. Thank you so much. And welcome, my friends. As Rudrani mentioned, today I will be talking to you about the economics of government, and it will be from quite a, theoretical perspective. And I understand that for Indian Economic Service, this lecture will be relatively easy. It was quite tough when there was a heterogeneous crowd, in other, civil service probationers training program. But I think you will be able to enjoy and connect to this lecture better. And Rudrani, it is after my session there. That's why my sound is little, I
Yeah,
was, yeah. I'm clear and audible, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thank you. So
No, now your sound has gone. Hello, ma'am, your sound has gone.
this is quite linked to the
uh,
mechanism. Yeah, tell me.
Ma'am, can you please repeat again because in between your sound was gone.
Oh, I was getting a call and I muted the call. That
Oh,
might be
okay,
the reason.
okay, okay.
Okay. So I'm going to begin right now. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, so the first question I would like to address regarding the economics of government is the link between democracy and public expenditure decisions. Does democracy determine public expenditure decisions, or for that matter, the economics of government? And, if you look back in the Nobel laureate Hurwitz, his literature, his papers, related to the demand revealing mechanisms. When I talk about the demand revealing mechanisms, it is related to revealing the demand for a public good. So, if you look at his literature, simultaneously, we have to arrive at, incentive compatibility between what the government has to provide and what the citizens like. And we have to do it at a Pareto optimality situation, and the budget has to be balanced. So many engineer economists, they have gone through the iteration procedures and a lot of convergence. They tried to arrive at these three conditions of Pareto optimality and balanced budget and incentive compatibility between the government, what they are providing and what citizens want. But only two conditions among the three is simultaneously possible. So this is like a demand, what do you call the mechanism design literature, or it's about the demand revealing mechanism. When such degree of arbitrariness in the supply and the demand for public good, as well as the financing of the public good, because public good, the financing is quite an important issue. When it comes to the economics of government or the political economy of the government, pure public good, how we can finance, that's a question, because citizens can always reveal this strategic than sincere, right? So when you reveal your preferences or demands strategically than sincerely, then the financing of a public good is a matter of concern that I would like to flag. So, in this arbitrariness, what voting models or what the calculus of consent can throw light to these issues. That's my first question, for you. If you look at the theory of calculus of voting, of course, we begin with the assumption that voting is an irrational act. You can look into the theories on the utility of voting. If it's an irrational act, what you anticipate is the cost to vote is greater than what we expect in return from our voting pattern, from our calculus of consent. But this conclusion is a bizarre concept, and ideologically, this can lead to democratic collapse. So, what is this apparent paradox in this theory? When you test this theory, what are the factors or determinants, which can save us from this moment of, a democratic collapse? And what are the factors which lead to the calculus of consent that deter you from your voting behavior? For a moment, you believe that the rewards in utils from the voting, that expected utility based on the rational voters hypothesis, that is the expected utility hypothesis based on the Anthony Don's public choice, the calculus of voting. If I look at that basic vocabulary of voting models of public goods, the rewards and utils of voting is determined by the differential benefit, that is the benefits of having your candidate win when compared to the benefits of an opponent, and also based on the probability that your vote matters. That P into B is the benefits you derive from your voting, and P is a probability that you derive from your voting. But if this P into B is not greater than C, the cost of voting in terms of time, effort, and pecuniary expenses, then it's a moment of democratic collapse. You prefer not to vote rather than voting. So if you're interested in going into this, it's a small book like An Economic Theory of Democracy. You can take a look into Anthony Don's 1957, that book you enjoy, that's about the calculus of consent. And test of theory of this is done on ground. And the critics of Anthony Don's, that's a rational voters hypothesis, they predict very unrealistically low levels of turnout. But if we look at the voting behavior of people, it's not that bad. So, what's the take of debate here? It's like rather than asking why so many people don't vote, whether the economics of government doesn't matter to them, is it a rational choice to vote than not prefer to vote? So here, in the large set of N, the eligible voters that's to a particular election, the number of members who are voting may be huge, significant. So you're voting in that big set of N may be insignificant. Is that the reason why your size of B and your size of P may be very insignificant and the voting act is irrational? This is a question. So the literature and the public choice, the advancement in the literature by William Ricker, he has put forward another variable called D, that's about the sense of civic duty. That's a psychic benefits you measure in utility, right? So I vote because I like to vote. That's what this sense of duty or the right to voting. I vote because I like to vote. So that's a way. That variable was put into the Anthony John's equation of P into B and C, and that a huge C was controlled through this behavior from the citizens, like it's a duty, the sense of duty. But of course, it's theoretical. You need to test, does P matter or does B into B matter? What matters, the test of theory is very important prior to the elections and post to the elections. The testing of theory on ground is very important to understand the linkages between the democracy and the public expenditure decisions or the economics of government. Otherwise, the economics of government is just a function of non-political variables. There is no political economy operating into it. That's quite a powerful and restricting assumptions. At the same time, if I open, the static theories relate to, public goods, then again we are getting into trouble, because if we base our public finance principles on the basis of the static public goods theory, then also economics of government may not be, on board in a right kind of manner. So the discourses related to the public goods theory, let's have a look at it. The principle of the public goods theories that rest on the assumed existence of market failure, right? So here, first, we need to identify the goods and services that contains and that retain, very important, that retains the characteristics of the publicness. And the second point related to the public goods, when it rests on the existence of market failure, is related to method of financing of a public good. So, what exactly is a public good? Let's refresh our memory. A good that is impossible to prevent anyone from enjoying it. That's a characteristics of non-excludability, and it is impossible, or it can be equally enjoyed by all. That's a characteristics of non-rivalness in production. So there are many prime examples for the pure public good, but I would like to take up the most frequently cited example in the public finance literature or in the public economics literature, that is a lighthouse. You must be remembering the Stiglitz book, right? The Stiglitz Public Economics. His cover page has a picture of lighthouse, and there is a small note on the first page why he has selected lighthouse as the cover page of his book on public economics. And it's a nostalgic debate whether public economic in the public economics, lighthouse is an example of a pure public good. So what exactly is a public good here? When I talk about lighthouse, it is the beam of light that's shed by the lighthouse to guard the ships at sea or the navigational hazards. So here the policy implication arising from the non-rivalness and non-excludability is that only public sector can supply such a good, and that ought to be supplied at zero cost. So here the ardent supporter of this proposition was Samuelson. We can brush up our memory. He developed the theory of public goods. It's a series of famous articles, right? He used lighthouse as the most telling example of a pure public good. But in 1974, the debate took a turn when Ronald Coase was the first economist to question the use of lighthouse as a prime example of a public good. You can read, if you're interested, you can take a look at the lighthouse in economics, because there are many papers in the Cambridge Journal of Economics even now. Scholars are working on the publicness of a good, and the lighthouse is revisited even in the recent literature in the Cambridge Journal of Economics. You can take a look. There are beautiful articles. Even I want to write an article on this, like revisiting lighthouse and looking into the publicness, because in the era of public private partnership and PPP models, when you cannot retain the publicness, what exactly are we talking about when we talk about a pure public good? So this is a changing notion, right? So I also want to write a paper on revisiting this, lighthouse. It's my dream. Maybe in future, when I write a paper, then I can send that link to you. But I really want to write. Let us unpack the exclusion principle over here. Exclusion is technically possible when we think about lighthouse. So we are trying to unpack what Samuelson visualized as public good. When we talk about the characteristics exclusion, technically exclusion is possible over here. But of course, the prohibitive cost of exclusion, that's a crucial factor that's going to determine the element of publicness. So even if it is possible to claim a toll from a very nearby ship, the fact that it would not be necessarily make it socially optimal, because the service to be provided like a private good at a market determined individual price. We cannot do that, right? Because it costs society zero extra cost. If you let an extra ship use the service of this beam of light, the ships are discouraged from the waters by requirement to pay a positive price, but it represents a social economic loss. So why are we doing it when there is a zero, extra cost? Now looking into the next characteristics of publicness, of non-rivalness of consumption. Here, Samuelson again stressed that the benefit derived by one ship from the lighthouse does not reduce the benefits to others. So we can argue that even if exclusion is possible, it is inefficient in such cases, right? Because we are applying the welfare principle over here of pricing at the marginal cost, then the price of lighthouse services should be zero, right? So we have to ignore here the congestion cost associated with the crowding of shipping lines. Otherwise, these characteristics of non-rivalry, that stay. And when Ronald Coase talked about that it's not a public good, he has not spoken it from the pricing or the marginal cost perspectives. He was looking it from a historical perspective, like what could be the elements of exclusion. So he looked into the property rights, not from the marginal cost principle. He looked into the property rights. So the moment or the first step, to be established, the moment we open Lighthouse to be a private enterprise, is the property rights. Like, the service offered that, one particular enterprise should be legally entitled to capture that benefits because if we allow a competition the moment we open it, then the competitive lighting can confuse the mariner, right? So from the historical perspectives, if we look at the empirical evidence, the private provisioning of lighthouse, we can get some nostalgic examples in Northern Ireland, in the Britain. These places, the lighthouse was done exclusively by the private people because their motive was like, they were very devoted, like they want to guard the ship. So it was like occupational hazard was there. They took all this coal. It was like before the technological revolution, they took all the way the coal up to the lighthouse through the narrow stairway, and they light it up and guard the ship from navigational hazards. So that's a way. So such kind of commitment, that why should one individual do it? Like what is motivating him to do that regularly when the return is almost nil. So in such cases, the historical perspective, what Alan Peacock and what Ronald Coase were talking about is not from these marginal static principles, but they were looking into the historical experiences, because hysteresis is a powerful way, a powerful methodology to look into public economics, and they were coming from that perspective. And of course, another important point is we need to penalize the free riders. So we need to devise mechanisms in which the free riders can also be penalized. So property rights and penalizing free riders, these two are important dimensions the moment we talk about the elements for exclusion. So when I talk about this free rider issue, since the consumption of public good is non-conflicting, it follows that people have an incentive to understate their true demand, to understate their true preference for that public good. So when the consumption is non-competitive, when we cannot use prices to prevent consumers from consuming that public good, then these free rider problems arise. And of course, the problem of incentive compatibility I mentioned. So revealing a true demand for a public good is a problem, and hence the financing of a public good is really, really an issue. And I don't know how many of you have thought about these issues when it comes to the financing of a pure public good. So these are the limitations of the public goods theory, the public goods literature. And as I mentioned, as I said, Coase in 1947 was the first economist to question the use of the lighthouse as a prime example of the public good, because he highlighted that it is not historically true that lighthouses have been exclusively publicly provided and have not been able to charge, because Coase thesis illustrated what I mentioned, the private provision of the lighthouse, and it was profitable, even it was profitable within the framework of property rights. So government should guarantee local monopoly privilege to a lighthouse the moment we open it to private sector. And because the local locational monopoly of light is very important for the efficient operation. Otherwise, as I said, the competitive lighting can confuse the mariner. So this parable of lighthouse that was inaugurated by course that has to tell about all these limitations of the public goods theory. That the question is, when I ask you what is a public good, can you give me examples? We need to keep in mind this: which are the goods we can identify, the goods and services we can identify, which contain and retain. I stress, I emphasize, retain the nature of publicness. So the lighthouse illustrates how the existence of the public good, that can be just transitory. This publicness of a good can be transitory, that is not permanent. And this is what is written by Alan Peacock in his article Economics of Government. If you are interested, you can take a look at this article, Economics of Government by Alan Peacock. And here the publicness characteristics of the goods, that is a very shaky foundation. That's what Alan Peacock has argued to build either a normative or positive theory of public expenditure, and especially what I mentioned as financing. So there is growing skepticism of using the state static Pareto, optimal kind of a welfare economics as a guidance to the public policy decisions, with relate to the public good. So these are the constraints. Whether, the calculus of consent can help us. Of course, it has got its own limitations and its political economy. How it translates into beautiful public expenditure decisions. The next we looked into the public goods, the static theories, whether it can help us. But of course, we are grappling with the financing pattern, and these static theories cannot give practical solutions for delivering a public finance. The public finance, I don't know how many of you have thought that as such a difficult proposition to public finance a good. Now coming into a little bit of technicalities, just brushing up our memory. It's based on the polar case model of government, that what's a private good and what a public consumption good. A private consumption good, the total can be parceled out among two or more components, right? And one component means it will be like it's a deduction from the overall X. So if X is a total consumption, then it is a summation of X1, X2. That's a private consumption good. But if we look at the polar case of model in Samuelson and look into the public consumption good, it's not the summation, but it is equality. Like, the public consumption good like defense, it's provided for each person, whether it enjoy or not, according to his taste, but it is provided to him. And public good differs from the private good in the sense each man consumption is it's an equality. X1 is equal to X2 is equal to that big X. It's a summation. It's not a summation. It is an equality. But in the case of private consumption good, that's a summation. But these are polar cases of goods, private and public good. In between these two polar cases, we can look into the club goods. And the club goods, that refers to the collective goods. And it's a subtype of a public good, if you ask me, and it is excludable. But non-rivals rivalry, that component, at least that's not there until we reach a point of congestion. So exclusion is possible. So that's a club good. So for example, if you look into the theatrical entertainment theater, if you look into the sports club and below consumption levels, that's non-rival. And exclusion, of course, to get into the theater, that exclusion works at the gate, right? It's only a few people can enter. That exclusion is possible through public finance principles or other finance principles. So the Buchanan's club theory, it's a part of impure public good. And actually, this is to fill the Samuelsian gap between that extreme or the polar cases of private and public goods. That's not a polar situation in the real world. In between, there are, various dimensions in which we can talk about club good, and also we can talk about the, common property resources. There, the exclusion is not possible, but there is rivalry. So these are the, if you show a matrix, the extreme cases can be public and private. In between that, they can be club good and what do you call, impure other good like common property resources. So Buchanan demonstrated how these conditions of the public good provision and the club membership interact. And public good is a particular case of a, sorry, the club good is a particular case of a public good, because it has the characteristics of excludability and non-rivalry depending on congestion. And but pure public good is not like that. It is non-excludable and non-rival. Okay, you can take a look into the economic theory of clubs that came in Economica in 1965, written by Buchanan, to know about these details. Now, coming to the fiscal decentralization, or the kind of theory we talk about, that voting with feet. Of course, when I say voting with feet, of course, it's not the migration crisis we dealt with recently. That is not voting with feet in that sense, because it's out of a crisis. Voting with feet is an empowering process. Why I say that it's a kind of a club good formation of a jurisdiction, because if a particular jurisdiction is not providing the goods and services which is enjoyable to a citizen, he can vote with his feet to the next jurisdiction in which his needs or the revealed demands are fulfilled, satisfied, so he can move. So that also a kind of a creation of public good. This is another kind of literature coming up when we talk about this pioneering club good of the T-boot hypothesis of voting with feet. That's an attempt to show how jurisdictional size of a local government can be determined by the voluntary mobility decisions. So in this voting with feet model, the amount of the shared local public good that is fixed, right? And it is fixed in for each governmental jurisdiction, and a decentralized decision making mechanism here allows to be Pareto optimal for the local provisioning of the public goods. And now come to, I would like to talk to you a little bit about the demand revealing mechanisms, because when I talk about how difficult it is to finance the public good, it is closely correlated to the demand revealing mechanisms of the pure public good. Because as I mentioned, revealing the demand for a pure public good, that's a problem when it comes to the question of financing. Because as I mentioned, revealed your demand strategic or sincere, that's a hitch. So pricing cannot be used here to prevent consumers from consuming this public good. Here, the consumption is not competitive, because whether you pay taxes or not, Air Force protects you from the foreign aggression. That is, in the literature, it's written that it's a short step to suggest that as atomistic agents, as individual agents, we have a tendency to understate the demand for a pure public good in order to avoid paying for it. So there is lintel wixel mechanism in the mechanism design and Herwix. When I began my talk, I mentioned about the Herwix, that three simultaneous conditions which we need to fulfill to solve this crisis or this issue. Like as lintel and wixel, Wixelian links, right? Wixelian link means the amount or the unit of the tax you pay and the unit of the utility, the satisfaction you derive from it. There is a link between these two. Okay, but the moment it breaks, there is a rich kind of vocabulary related tax evasion and all. But in Scandinavian countries, this Wixelian connection quite work, because we cannot see any kind of a rich vocabulary of tax evasion or tax havens in the context of Scandinavian countries, even when the tax you have to pay is much, it's not as low as what's in India, but we think that it's huge, and we think about tax evasion, but there, it's as huge as 40 or 50%, but the people have a very good feeling to pay the government the taxes, because there is Wixelian connections between the tax paid and the utility they derive from it. So how mechanism design get into this? Let's have a look. Every consumer wants to free ride in case of public goods. So ideally, a mechanism design which we have to devise is based on the three conditions which I mentioned. One is supply of public goods needs to be Pareto optimal. Second is everybody should find it in a self-interest to tell the truth, given that we do not want an allocative repercussions on the rest of the economy. And third, public goods budget should be balanced. And Herwig's mechanism design, he could not solve this simultaneously, the three conditions of Pareto optimality, incentive compactability, and the balanced budget. But Linton and Wixel, they try to solve this issue, but you can always, you can always criticize how they have done. Have they wished away this free rider problem, or they have really solved this issue? That question remains. But let's have a look at it, how they have done purely. But I am aware of the criticism that's there for this Lintel Wixel solution, that iterative algorithm. What they have proposed is that, what they have done is that, there are two sets of people, consumers, and one set of consumers, they mention that, my utility which I derive from this particular good is high, so I am willing to pay high taxes. So instead of having that capital T, which is a, aggregate, same tax payable for all the consumers, what we are doing is atomistic taxes. It's individualistic taxes, that the T, the small T1, T2, that's the way we are going to experiment. It's a pure Lintel-Wixel solution. And the set of consumers who believe that they don't derive much satisfaction from that particular pure public good, they try to strategically, expose their demand like, we don't have much satisfaction from this, so we are going to pay less. So what Lintel-Wixel solution articulates is that, increase the share of taxes of those who want more of that public good, and reduce the share of the taxes, reduce the tax share of those who want less of that public good. So the demand of former group fall in the long term, and the demand for of the latter group increase in the long term. And this process can be repeated and repeated till the convergence point is reached. But that's the way the convergence is forthcoming in the Lintel-Wixel mechanism. But of course, the limitation is over there, whether the demand revealing is strategic or sincere. And, there are many constraints. You can always, have a critical evaluation of these things, because people research on these aspects and they take a relook at these algorithms. Now, coming to the size of government, the size of government matters a lot. The body size of government, in the thumb rule, if I apply, it's a public expenditure to GDP. And there are many theories which talk about the relationship between the size of the government and economic growth. uh, and that's a positive link, and it's a secular link. But at the same time, literature also speaks about that the size of the government, it's not just stable or secular. There can be spurts in the size of government. For instance, if you brush up your memory, the Peacock and Wiseman, they have spoken about the spurts in, the public expenditure, the size of the government, like after a war, the size of government, or even a large-scale natural disaster, or even a countercyclical fiscal policy, when there is a big recession, or even after this global financial crisis, there was a kind of fiscal redominance. And in our context, we can have a look at the contemporary economics of government of our country, whether the size of the government, because fiscal deficit has now become, more than 9%. That's what revealed. But of course, I'm aware of, what the off-budget liabilities are incorporated, and how we design the expenditure spurt to address the stimulus packages. That dichotomy I'm aware of, but still I'm telling that this deficit is good narrative when it is floated. That size of government debate, that fiscal redominance is getting back to Indian economy, and we started debating on that. And what are the crucial theoretical debates when it comes to the economics of government? Now, can you connect to the debates happening right now regarding the investment crowding out? Because if you look at, if you open any channels now, there is a revisit to these direct and financial crowding out. Okay, and what is direct crowding out? If the government increases a dollar, it displaces $1 increase in the public investment, that displaces $1 in private corporate investment. So is it so? In the context of India, are you facing a direct crowding out when the moment you announced a high fiscal deficit, it's going to affect the animal spirits of your economy, the investors' confidence, and we are erring, it's not on the side of caution, but we have not looked into the fiscal consolidation path quite strict this year, because we thought that the excessive deficit procedure will be on board in the coming years. But the moment we were a little bit relaxed about this public, the economics of government related to the fiscal consolidation, so that demand is open. But the moment you look at the financial crowding out is in the sense that you preempt your loanable funds in the economy to finance the deficits, right? But the preemption of loanable funds otherwise available for the private corporate sector shrinks. Is there any pressure on the rate of interest? That's a question researchers are looking into. There is empirical evidence we show that there is crowding in if we are investing into the investment in the infrastructure. And if you look at the economics of government in the this budget 2021, there's a powerful articulation that government is giving emphasis to the capital infrastructure. But the moment you look into the question of as a percentage of GDP, of course it is 2%, but that emphatic or that signaling that the government is ready to take the long-term reform measures in terms of the capital spending, whether that is quite okay, because the exuberance in the financial markets you have seen after the budget. But the question here is, there is ambiguity, there is lack of clarity in terms of the PPP models and how that national infrastructure pipeline is going to function. What's a kind of share between center, state, and the private partnership and the foreign capital going to be on board regarding the. But budget is not everything. It signalizes things, but in the due course we need to see that how it is going to be rolled out, because this economics of government in times of pandemic has got two important components. One is economic firefighting component, other is like we consider this crisis as an opportunity, and we take this opportunity to roll out different reforms which are of medium term and long term in nature, because the kind of debates related to the business cycles, whether it is there in the Indian economy or not, you may be aware of those kind of debates in the context of Indian economy. So you also must have seen the paper by Geeta Gopinath, the cyclist trend, where she articulates that the dip or the deviation of your economy from the trend is may not be a temporary cyclical dip, but it can be a permanent shock to the income, or it's a permanent dip. So if that is the case, the economics of government, if we focus on fiscal policy and of course for that matter the monetary policy just as a counter cyclical policy tool, you may not get your economics of government quite right. When I say this, we are also in the brink of revising the new monetary policy framework, and there are many questions related to that. In March, after 5 years, we floated this new monetary framework based on the concept that price stability is the sole function of the monetary policy maker. We have floated this, but the time has come for take a relook at the inflation targeting framework, which we peg the interest rate based on the inflation expectations and unobserved variable. We tackle with floating the inflation expectation survey and output gap, again an unobserved variable of potential output. It's a controversial. You can take a look at my article written in Financial Express recently to know about the methodological issues I highlighted regarding the output gap. So such kind of things exist, and I do remember that Rudrani has a paper. She presented that paper related to this contemporary economics of government, to look into the hysteresis rather than looking into the aspects of economic growth from a cyclical point of view. She will articulate that in her lecture, I feel. And there are questions related to this output gap. Now, coming to the question of rules-based fiscal packages, and there is a concern in the Indian economy that we need to take a relook into the fiscal responsibility and management bill. You can take a look into the clauses in the recent finance bill. This is the third time we amend the SRBM. So the macroeconomic framework of union budget, that's quite relevant. You can understand that when I talk about this macroeconomic framework or the economics of government, of union budget, the fiscal consolidation is given a huge relevance. Of course, we have taken a slightly flexible path at the subnational and the national government level relate to these kind of debates of on the fiscal responsibility, because earlier the articulation and the empirical evidence suggests that the fiscal discipline is growth enhancing. But at the same time, whether subnational governments over adjusted to the fiscal rules at the cost of the capital, fixed capital formation in our country, or whether it has got long term policy repercussions in terms of economic growth recovery, these are the questions coming up. And of course, there's an issue of widening inequality, whether it's a K-shaped recovery or V-shaped recovery, that these are all questions. So when I talk about economics of government against the backdrop of these debates, I quite emphasize not only just economic growth recovery, but also the widening of inequalities. Now coming to the question of financing of public expenditure, or when we talk about the economics of government, financing is quite an important thing, because the transition channels via rate of interest and all through the bond financing we were quite aware of and concerned. But I don't know whether it has happened in such a manner that the fiscal deficit has, transmitted to the rise in the interest rate or anything. Because if you look at closely, even the negative interest rate also, it was a reality. But now the inflation, it's not that high. But when the repo rate is 4%, and when the inflation, when it gone up to more than 6%, then we even realize a negative rate of interest in the context of Indian economy. So there is an unpleasant fiscal arithmetic or an unpleasant monetary arithmetic in this context. When I say unpleasant monetary arithmetic, let me take the monetary first. That means fiscal policy dominates monetary policy, and the fiscal authority independently sets the budgets and decide on the financing modes of the deficits. And there is a limitation if you go ahead with the bond financing, in the sense bond financing cannot go on forever, since the demand for bonds places an upper limit on the stock of bonds relative to the size of economy. Of what I mean is, you have to calibrate your R and G. R is a real growth of economy, and your G is a size of economy, and R is your real rate of interest. So there is a limitation for the bond financing. If your R is greater than G, then you have to eventually monetize your deficits. So you have to switch over to synerate financing of deficits. But in India, over the years, we controlled the synerate financing of deficits, because it had quite a bit of inflationary potential. So through the agreement or the institutional reforms, between the government of India and RBI, we came to an agreement. That time, C. Rangarajan was the RBI governor. We came to an agreement that monetized deficit needs to be contained, because we were quite concerned about reserve money in the economy. So reserve money, if you look at the important components, it is, the net foreign exchange assets. You have the net RBI credit to the government. So if the moment you play with the net RBI credit to the government, if you control that, the reserve money, one component is controlled, right? But, in spite of controlling the monetized deficit, that time India was not completely successful in controlling the reserve money or the high powered money, because our foreign exchange was booming. But at the same time, if both components, if the net RBI credit the government as well as the foreign exchange, both, when that situation would be different, like reserve money or the power high powered money can go, just like that, if both components are not controlled. And seigniorage technically is the change in high powered money to GDP. So it technically, if you want to compute seigniorage, it is change in high powered money, delta HPM by GDP. Okay. And there is seigniorage Laffer curve also will give you a kind of a threshold level in which you can go ahead with the seigniorage financing, in which the inflation, that potential can be worked out using a seigniorage Laffer curve. But in India, though this debate was opened, that whether seigniorage financing, or it's not a kind of a helicopter dropping of money which Ben Bernanke or that helicopter when visualize, it's little different. Of course, one component of helicopter money is MFFP, that is a money financing of fiscal programs. But economics of government, that debate was not quite owned by the government of India, because we have not opened up that money financing of fiscal programs in our country, because we are quite apprehensive of its impact on currency and the inflationary potential it can bring. At the same time, there is a concern that we were going ahead with the asset sale as an important potential source of getting revenue, but we were not playing with the debt deficit dynamics, and we are not exploring the potential of sewerage financing, because we have controlled the monetization of deficit, because we have seen that what is the repercussion. So even if heterodox economists put forward that sewerage financing, that particular link that you money finance a particular fiscal program, a demand related stimulation, you can just link that, whether it's an employer of last resort or whether it is a cash transfer, whether instead of just focusing on the supply side, liquidity infusion into the economy, and regulatory mechanisms. Of course, you have tackled the repo rate and it is kept constant, the status quo over that. All these things you have done through the supply side, but to stimulate that, do you need an MFFP, the money financing a fiscal program? But we are not bold enough to embrace that kind of a debt deficit dynamics yet, because we do believe the economics of government, the contemporary government believe that the stability of the revenue, it bases on that we define or design the expenditure priorities. And of course, we take a bold step regarding the fiscal consolidation, but the roadmap is clearly put. Okay, it's not even the escape clauses or anything. A clear roadmap is put, but it's a long route. It's not the recent, like in a year's time, we get back to fiscal deficit or not. But I am not talking about the fiscal profligacy. But a moment, I do value this narrative that don't fear deficits at this moment, because any abrupt rollback of this package, this economic stimulus package, that economics of government can be detrimental, because that can have repercussions on the macroeconomic recovery, greater than if you don't have an abrupt rollback of the policies which you have floated in the country. But normalization procedure is on, because liquidity, we have seen that in the monetary money market, the the call money rates are below the repo rate, and on the other end, the gilt edged market, it's the above 10 years bond yield, that's getting shooting up. So the term structure of the interest rate, there are concerns, like as a counter-cyclical policy tool, or whatever it takes to narrative. That was the way in which Dr. Shaktikant Das has put forward his heavy lifting policy packages from the monetary policy. But of course, when it has got its own limitations, the economics of government has to be fiscal rate dominance, and we need to get into such kind of financing decisions the moment we talk about this contemporary economics of government. And we have, I think, half an hour. I will take up your questions, and maybe I will listen to all your questions and come back and respond to all these things. And I will also do my final winding up statement over there. 5 minutes to one or something like that. But the next 10 minutes, I would like to hear your voices and your concerns regarding the economics of government. So to recap my lecture, I explored the public goods, the non-rival and non-excludable, questioning the publicness by taking the example of the lighthouse. And I think that some of the scholars may work on revisiting the lighthouse as an example of the transitory nature of publicness, and how it is not helping the economic, the scholars and the public policy makers to go ahead with the financing decisions. Then I mentioned about the mechanism design literature, how the demand revealing mechanisms, the free rider issues, and the incentive compatibility are quite huge. When you reveal your preference, quite strategic rather than sincere, how it can affect the public expenditure financing decisions relate to pure public good. Then we look into a bit of public choice literature by taking up the Buchanan's Club goods, Samuelson and gap between the public and private literature. And of course, the democracy, whether it determines the public expenditure decisions. That question was also articulated. But in retrospect, people vote. The voting pattern, if you look at the calculus of consent? Is it in retrospect that what the economics government prior to you, whether that also can affect your consent to have a government on board, or your dominant party to be on board when you think about this political economy decisions with relate to the economics of government, that in retrospect we do give our consent. So these were the quick things I thought that I will speak to you when I design my lecture on the economics of government. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions, and try to fine tune my observations, and I can also give clarifications if any. And thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am. This is Anshuman speaking. Am I audible, ma'am?
Speaking.
Ma'am, good afternoon. Thank you for your illuminating lecture.
Anshuman.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I got your message. Yeah, tell me. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, thank you for your illuminating lecture. From your lecture, I had two themes that I would like to seek more of your thoughts on. The first thing is about when you talk about when you said the R minus G differential, and you said that financing through the MFFP has its own limitations, because eventually there'll be a time when you'd have to you run into difficulties and you'd have to ultimately monetize your deficit. Ma'am, I just wanted to ask whether this is inexorable, because as you rightly pointed out that you are raising bonds and thereby undertaking fiscal policy. So if you because you are undertaking fiscal policy, you are so what you're hinting at is that R will be going up, but at the same time, if your quality of expenditure is rather high, particularly with capital expenditure having high multiplier effect, then your G continues to be very high, and as long as the G is higher than R, then it should not be a problem. So in that context, would you like to clarify if it is inexorable that definitely this kind of policy of MFFP will run into difficulties, ultimately requiring monetizing of deficit? That is my first question. Ma'am, second question is when we talk of monetizing of fiscal deficits in the context of India, because we know that as you were also hinting at that on the basis of an agreement between the Reserve Bank of India and the Government of India, the direct monetization of deficits has now come to an end. What is the way we can measure Sinuraj in India? Because Sinuraj, as I understand, is basically how much of the deficit is being lifted by the monetary authority. But because that is no longer directly done, so how can we tease out the amount of Sinuraj that exists in money creation in the context of India? Thank you, ma'am.
Anshuman, brilliant questions. Of course, I'm tempted to answer you, but let me listen to your colleagues, and I'll come back to your questions. These both questions are brilliant.
Any other questions, please?
Yes, ma'am. This is Kamil speaking. I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned that there is a transitory nature of some public goods, that if property rights can be assigned, then they no longer remain pure public goods. So, from this perspective, don't you think that almost everything can be like contracted out to the private sector, except maybe defense, or when there are some soft incentives needed, or some people are getting priced out of the market, so equity concerns. So apart from that, would this lead to the conclusion that if we have a good legal system, if we can negotiate the right contracts, then almost everything can be contracted out, and so the role of the government is much reduced in that case. And another thing I wanted to ask is, to what extent can the government target real variables, like let's say the real rate of interest or the real exchange rate? So is it possible for the government to target them? Thank you.
More questions, please. It's brilliant, brilliant question.
Anybody else, please? No, I don't think nobody else is going to ask any more questions. So,
Okay, Rudrani. Okay, so
yeah.
let me take up these 6 questions. The first question is about the R greater than G. Anshuman, you rightly mentioned that if the quality of your deficit is good, why are you fearing about going ahead with the deficit? That question I particularly value because it all depends upon the quality of your deficit. But the question is, when you look into the debt sustainability literature, there are 2 dimensions to it. One is you assign a threshold public debt to GDP ratio as a norm, as a fiscal rule, and call that, if you are above 60%, like what we have right now is a 20% for the states and 40 for the center. So the moment a state government has a public debt above 20%, then there are many macroeconomic mechanisms in which we try to control the deficit, and that affects the quality of deficit, maybe at the cost of capital spending you rightly mentioned. But at the same time, if we look at the debt sustainability question from R greater than G, then you can have the leverage that unless R is greater than G, that's what my director, Pinaki Chakraborty, his thesis is on the public debt sustainability. So he looked into all these aspects, and that's what he proposed, that if R is greater than G, then only that concept of debt unsustainability come into existence. And also he mentioned in his writings about the composition, the structure or the maturity structure of the public debt, which you and me, Anshuman and myself, has not looked into. What he's talking about is, for instance, look at the Operation Twist policy of central bank, which was floated recently. It's a simultaneous selling and buying of bonds in the market to elongate the maturity structure. It's like you are simultaneously selling the short term and simultaneously buying the long term so that the refinancing risk is reduced, and you're getting your path clear for an economic growth. So this was done by subnational governments. If my memory is correct, it's done by Telangana because it was a new state. To attain to the high growth trajectory, what they were doing is playing up with the maturity structure, not even R, G, or that kind of concepts, not even with the threshold norms of public debt, but with the maturity structure of the bond market structure. So this is a third dimension. Now coming to the question of unpleasant monetary arithmetic, which you mentioned, Anshuman, the alternative is unpleasant fiscal arithmetic. Unpleasant fiscal arithmetic is the first mover advantage we are giving to the monetary policy maker, the central bank independence, and we are giving emphasis to the real rate of interest. The interest rate is going to be the dominant policy, which has got the one-to-one repercussions on the economic growth. Whether that will be a powerful variable when there is no fiscal dominance, the fiscal policy makers will be the second movers. So that's the alternative we have. And if you are interested, you take a look at that article by Boiter, in which he clearly articulates the 2 scenarios of economics of government. One is unpleasant monetary arithmetic, in which the fiscal policy maker is a first mover, and for the financing decisions, you come up with a kind of support from the monetary policy maker. At the same time, you're concerned about the synergy, that we cannot go ahead with the synergy financing of deficit, because the moment in which your R is greater than G, we will eventually finance deficit. But you are asking me, you go ahead with you go ahead bold in that path the moment you are quite confident about the quality of your deficit. If it is in inflation spurting, if it is inflation inducing in nature, not inflation investment, if it is triggering the investment, go ahead with that, because you're ensuring your quality, though you have a R greater than G situation. But the thing is that here MFFP, whether it is helicopter money, or whether helicopter money in the sense like you're giving money into the hands of people, the concern raised by Rekuram Rajan, is that this helicopter money can work and trigger the economy only if the propensity to spend is greater than the propensity to save. But what we have seen from the empirical evidence is that despite the helicopter money, the people may have the propensity to save. And if you look at the recent high frequency data or the estimates in the time of pandemic also, we have seen that the propensity to save is higher. So this is one limitation of going ahead with the money financing. If it is through the helicopter dropping of money, that is one component of the new articulation about between debt and devil debt and devil. That's a very good book by Tuner. So if you take a look at that debates in his book, the Tuner quite articulated these kind of important components of money financing a fiscal program. But it is not like the way I am articulating an open-ended monetization of deficit. No, because when we have constraints, a little bit of scenario is good if you don't have any other source of income and you don't please float fiscal austerity wave, because fiscal austerity, it can mount into humanitarian crisis. So that's the point in which I would like to emphasize. Please don't go for fiscal austerity way by telling that revenue stability matters for my expenditure decisions. In the time of revenue uncertainty, I don't have money, so I will do an expenditure compression. So if you are reaching that kind of a compelling position, then please rethink about money financing of fiscal programs in a finite space. That's my what do you call the submission to you. But it's not like an open-ended fiscal profligacy or anything. But if we are reaching a next wave of fiscal austerity, that's going to have a lot of repercussions. Because if you look at the European Union context, they have the monetary policy exogenous. The flexibility of fiscal policy was limited. Then came the Maastricht Treaty. It has led to, it has killed many economies when the financial oligarchy starts operating and taking decisions about the financing pattern. But in our country, at least we don't have that financial oligarchy taking decisions by giving more emphasis to the external financing of deficit, because those repercussions are different. What we are grappling with is this shift from seigniorage financing to the bond financing. That's what. And Anshuman, if we want to further debate, I'm available. As you always write to me, we can take this point ahead, and we can discuss it over a cup of tea later also. I'm available. And now let me take the question of Kemal regarding the publicness and regarding, of course, you're right that there is a transitory nature to all these public goods. But when the publicness is transitory, what's the role of government in taking up decisions regarding financing of a public good? Very relevant question. And that's what exactly I said in my lecture also about this transitory nature of public good. But the thing is that the moment you open it to the private sector, if deals are determining the economic growth, not even the, here the question is not even inequality, it's the iniquities in the systems, that certain deals, the certain crony things are going to decide your economic growth. So as you rightly pointed out, unless we have regulatory mechanisms, these deals will get into the kind of widening inequalities. So the role of government, even if it's a merit good, like health or education, even if it's a pure public good, the moment you start opening your thought process regarding even the privatization, which was the kind of mentioned in the union budget, of course, as you rightly mentioned, unless we correct the deals or the contracts in the system, then we are going to get into trouble. And privatization is not just the matter of getting proceeds for financing your deficit. There are other kinds of dimensions related to labor market repercussions, and also the regulatory mechanisms you quite emphasize, the law and economics. That interface is quite relevant the moment we talk about opening it to the private sector regarding the merit goods and the public goods. That's why I said that the pricing and the marginal cost principles or that publicness concept or the public goods theories are not helping us in a practical manner to solve the issue related to the financing pattern, because we need to look into the political economy aspects. That's why I gave you a little bit of exposure to the public choice literature. So we need to look into these questions from both the political economy perspective, not from a strict publicness, the transitory nature of the publicness, from the strict marginal cost principles. And I do leave it there. And you are rightly pointed out that why don't we target on other important macro fiscal variables or macro monetary macro variables. Yeah, like over the years the monetary policy function now is only emphasizing on inflation targeting. Of course, you may say that the monetary policy function has to be very comprehensive to get your growth all right, but Rudrani also has written articles related to whether food inflation, how the expectations generated are controlled by the new monetary framework, those kind of issues, which inflation you are targeting, whether it is core or headline, or what really can be controlled by the new monetary policy framework. And these are the questions macro policy scholars are thinking aloud. And Rudrani's work you can read related to this monetary policy framework, and you can get quite a bit of insights. And I think that she also has a lecture related to this monetary macro. And I leave it there. And Rudrani, over to you. And thank you so much, students, for your brilliant questions. And wish you all the best. Oh no, I think I have one more lecture, so I will be back. Okay. Thank you,
Yes,
Rudrani.
yes. Thank you, Lekha. Thank you very much.